Thank you for coming to the PEN Congress. We're really pleased to have you here. As Special Representative for the OSCE since 2010, you've been at the centre of political developments in the region, no more so than in the last year. In terms of broad challenges, what do you see as the greatest challenge to free expression and freedom of the media in your region?
The greatest challenge is to continue raising the issue of the importance of free speech. In a way, I think it's not forgotten, but the way governments are trying to restrict our right to free speech is not moving in the right direction. We have many attempts to protect our societies, and for good and for bad reasons. And unfortunately, the cases I'm dealing with are for bad reasons. It is, in a way, cover up for laws that are restricting free speech, silencing differing voices, people having different opinions that the governments are actually proposing them to have. And this is the greatest challenge that all of us working for international organizations and all courageous NGOs and people engaging in communication work to continue raising these things and calling governments not to restrict our right to free speech. There are many challenges that I would call technical challenges, that the governments are introducing laws not in a transparent manner, overnight, without public consultations, that the access to information in so many countries is becoming even more complicated. So all those are signs that as a family of so-called democracies, we are not moving in a very good direction.
Thank you. PEN has been deeply involved in trying to maintain dialogue between Russian and Ukrainian writers during the current crisis. How do you see what's happening in Ukraine impacting on free expression and media issues in the region? And what are your biggest concerns for the media in Russia and Ukraine at the current moment?
Everything that is happening in Ukraine at the moment in relation to media freedom and free expression has enormous impact on all other countries, not just the countries of the post-Soviet world, but also countries in transition, and also the countries with a very long tradition of democratic dealings with media. We are very much engaged in this process, and I commend PEN also for bringing Russian and Ukrainian writers together. This is what the OSCE Freedom of Media Office is doing with journalists. It's important. Confidence building is extremely important. I come from Sarajevo, from Bosnia, from another part of the world that can be called the trouble part of the world, where we experience similar things when people that should be protecting the dignity of the profession are turned into different directions, trying to serve different political agendas. And in this process it's extremely important to continue dialogue and to continue this process of confidence building and bringing a dignity and importance of the profession in a daylight more than it is usually. The biggest challenge in Ukraine is that we continue working with the government and the civil society in order that the good laws that are adopted are implemented. That there is a lot done in order to ensure safety of journalists and media workers, and that free speech becomes something that is daily life in Ukraine. And in this process my office will continue working with the government and civil society in Ukraine, but also outside. And I think in this process PEN has a very important role, like many other international NGOs and credible NGOs, gathering people that can help, assist, and also offer a very professional view on how things can be improved in a times of crisis, when it's very difficult to expect any changes.
Staying on Russia and Ukraine, we've been very worried by the rise in attacks on journalists during the crisis, and we see here a legacy of impunity, as in many other countries, as a critical problem which enables continued violence against journalists. How is the OSCE working to combat impunity and work towards journalist safety?
That's in the focus of our work. Unfortunately, even in the 21st century, safety offline and safety online is a major problem we have. There is an attempt from too many governments to silence so-called newcomers, bloggers, online activists, Facebook activists, and just people posting certain views on their blogs and using social media. And this is another huge challenge that we have in not just in the OSCE region but beyond. In this process, impunity of course plays an important role. There are more and more people that are imprisoned because of their work. And the question pops up from time to time, asking who is journalist and who is not a journalist. And it's mainly coming from the governments that are trying to define what is journalism and who has so-called license to be a journalist. But then my answer to this is that, of course, states should not define this. And I think of artists. I mean, do you get a special license to become an artist? There are professions that are different in their sort of way of addressing public. And journalism and writers also, they have a different way of dealing with things. You know, there are, in a way, our eyes toward in some areas where we cannot find out what's happening. And in this process, and in 21st century in a digital era, what we have is people engaging more than ever before. For the first time ever, we have audience that is active and not passive. And in this process, what we need to do as a global society is to do absolutely everything to embrace these changes and benefits, but not restrict free speech because certain governments are afraid on how to deal with these things. Of course, these changes in a digital world are bringing more people are more exposed to everything that is happening. And in this process, what I see in my role is that in order to make a quick solutions, governments are just introducing the laws to suppress free speech.
Right. Thank you. Coming to Kyrgyzstan, what have you seen to be the major challenge to free expression in this country and more broadly in Central Asia? Obviously, in Kyrgyzstan, we've seen the growing influence of Russia, which looks set to continue. How do you see that panning out in the future?
I'm quite disappointed with everything that is happening in Kyrgyzstan related to free speech. In the recent developments, I'm talking. My office has been involved with the Kyrgyz authorities and civil society for a very long period in order to work on the laws decriminalizing libel, public service broadcasting, access to information, and many other things related to healthy media environment. And Kyrgyzstan was a leader in the region, which I said publicly on many occasions. First Central Asian state to introduce genuine public service broadcasting, starting very painful and very difficult process that is ongoing, decriminalizing libel as a first country in Central Asia, we worked with the authorities and offered the recommendations that were adopted by the parliament. And in this latest period, there were some changes and amendments to the law, which actually, in a way, through the small door, recriminalized libel. Is that because of everything that is happening in Russian Federation? Because Russia also decriminalized defamation, which I thought was an extremely important step for a country like Russia. Unfortunately, it was recriminalized less than 6 months after it was decriminalized. And I'm sure that it has an effect on other countries. But in a way, what happened in Kyrgyzstan was quite unfortunate. And I hope that it will be changed in certain period of time, that there will be a common sense coming from the government in order to keep Kyrgyzstan very high when it comes to media freedom in this region. Otherwise, I do not see that's going to be seen as a very positive step when it comes to free speech in Kyrgyzstan.
And just continuing on the Kyrgyzstan line, what do you see as the implications of the introduction of laws banning gay propaganda on free expression, in particular for freedom of the media? And
that is another issue that unfortunately nowadays we see in many countries trying to restrict speech that should not be restricted. Any speech that is criminalized is not something that can bring benefits to any society. And this in a way is an attempt also to follow what happened in Russia related to the law banning gay propaganda. And of course I heard on many occasions this is to protect children. I do not believe in this, based on analysis that me and my team made, and also other international organizations. It is purely to restrict thoughts and views on people having different opinions about certain issues. There are ways, and as communities belonging to different international organizations that countries joined voluntarily, we have tools and mechanisms to fight any speech that is incitement to violence, hatred, and that sort of thing. So why suddenly we are so cautious to introduce some laws that can only restrict speech and not protect societies in a way? And who is deciding? Is it the court or some quasi-judicial agencies that are very much connected to the governments, which I think it's a deadly proposal.
Just moving on to Azerbaijan, we've been really worried about the growth of arrests of journalists and writers. Our colleagues in Azerbaijan, a worry you shared in July when you noted that the largest number of arrested journalists in the OSCE region is in Azerbaijan. What do you think are the best ways to combat and to campaign against this worrying trend?
I have very good cooperation with Azerbaijani government. They do cooperate with us. And I'm very open in my dealings with the authorities, and latest cases that my office raised are very worrying because they just add to this problem that I raised on many occasions on the imprisonment. But now we have raids of NGOs that are working in the area of free expression and free media, access to information as well. There are also attempts to label them as foreign agents. And I had some really critical statements lately, and I do hope to be able to travel to Azerbaijan very soon for the official visit, where I can raise this with high-level authorities, and also to be able to meet people that are imprisoned. I had access to Azerbaijani prisons on several occasions, and this is something that I always welcomed very much, because the government always agreed to let me visit arrested journalists, imprisoned journalists, and some of them were released as well. But this trend that is happening now is not something that I would like to see in Azerbaijan or anywhere else. And I think we need to continue raising this publicly and trying to call governments for changing this very negative trend.
Thank you. Western Europe, why do so many countries continue to have criminal defamation on the books? And what can organisations like PEN do to push for the repeal of these laws in an effective way?
This is very unfortunate, I would say. Countries with a very long tradition of, democracy, free speech, they still have this on the books. In majority of these countries, these provisions are not used for decades. But that's not an excuse at all. This needs to be changed, and we continue pushing the governments. Recently, I was in Italy, where unfortunately those provisions are used. And there are attempts to change laws for better. But still, there are provisions that definitely would not fully decriminalize libel. And what is actually proving that this situation is not good is the cases they have in Italy before the court, before the different courts in the country. We also urged Denmark to decriminalize, and I was told maybe a year ago that yes, they know it's still there, but it never happens in Denmark, and it's just there. Maybe 6 months later, there was a case, a very prominent case, that is still pending, that I raised with the Danish government, and it is related to defamation. So as long as we have this on books, the chilling effect is there. Present or not, it can become present overnight. If the government's changed, if we have some developments in the society that can affect societies in general. And of course, the first reflection is in media and the way countries are dealing with media. So I'm urging also Western countries to do this. There are some leading examples. There are some good examples also in countries in transition, but much more needs to be done in order to see, I would say, light at the end of tunnel. I think European Commission should be much more courageous in raising these issues with their member states, and not to mention the ones that are candidate or potential candidate countries. I think criminalizing speech and talking about democracy doesn't go with each other.
On Turkey, we've just returned from the Internet Governance Forum in Turkey, where we were campaigning for internet freedom in the country. Can you speak a little about the situation of internet freedom and freedom of the media online, and how this is impacting on free speech in that country?
Turkey is a very complex country and a very important country, because many things happening in Turkey has reflection in many other parts of the world. In a way, media sector in Turkey is very vibrant. Even though recently the situation changed quite a bit. And there are several issues that I would like to mention in order to try to paint a picture when it comes to media freedom in Turkey. The problem we still have is safety of journalists. Even though situation changed tremendously, we had more than 100 journalists in prison some years ago. Now there are around 20. So it is visible that the government is doing something to change this negative trend. And we worked with the Ministry of Justice and many other institutions. I had official visit to Turkey, and I was also given unrestricted access to prison in order to meet journalists and to raise this again with the government. But that's not enough. This is also a process that is very painful process for the countries in transition. And for me, coming from the region that also has this sort of legacies from previous system, history, transition process that cannot be compared with Turkey, I have full understanding. But I think at the moment Turkey is a strong, powerful country that can also make some bold steps in order to change situation that is quite negative when it comes to media freedom. There are smear campaigns of the pro-governmental media towards independent journalists criticizing governments. There are many defamation cases. Internet is not free, definitely, even though we hear all the time it's free. There are hundreds of websites being blocked. Regulatory agency has powers that should not have. They banned Twitter and they banned YouTube. The good thing is that a constitutional court in Turkey made, in a way, I called it a historical decision, because they said that this was wrong. So they had to return to the previous stage. So at the same time you have these sort of attempts from a certain sort of institutions to do things for better, and then on the other side you have this attempt to restrict speech. We are trying to work, but this is not work only for one organization. What needs to be done is that we offer more assistance and expertise in these issues, even though I do not think it's missing in Turkey. What is missing and what I would like to see is more political will to create environment that is more friendly towards media, independent media.
I think finally, just wanted to ask, as a literary organisation, how can PEN centres and our writers use literature to further free expression and dialogue in the OSCE region during this particularly challenging time?
I mean, literature is important for our lives anyway. We cannot live and we cannot expect to live in a better societies if we do not have literature that we like and also do not like. What is important is to continue education and to work on internet and media literacy. But what PEN, as a sort of main organization dealing with writers, with the ones that are actually eye-openers in our society on so many things that are important, and that we would not be able also to form our opinions if we do not have these courageous people writing about all these things in the society. But writers, they have a different angle than journalists, even though everything is related to free speech. In my view, PEN has to be more present and more visible, and we all need to work